Hello, and welcome to another episode of Levy's Story Time. Today's story is Leroy and the Hateful Haircut. Leroy was a strong little boy. Even Leroy's hair was strong. His hair was so curly and so strong that it had broken 5 of Mama's combs. 5! Leroy loved his hair. He loved how curly and tangly it was. He loved how thick and black it was. His head was a garden of black twisty vines.
Willie.
That's why he hated haircuts. You hear me? Hated.
Like, really hated.
Whenever someone said the word haircut, he would spit. In fact, he didn't even call them haircuts. Spit.
He called them hair murders.
One day, Daddy and Mama sat him down. They looked like two people getting ready to wrestle a crocodile. Daddy said, "Son, I'm taking you to get a haircut down at Sammy's." Leroy spat. "You mean hair murder?" Mama gave him the "so help me" look, and he stopped that noise real quick.
But haircuts steal my mighty power.
He begged. They just shook their heads. "This is happening," said Daddy, "today." The thing was, Leroy knew his parents were no joke. He could protest, which he did.
But.
He could whine, which he did.
I don't want to go.
He could even sulk, which he did. But they were strong enough to hold their ground. He, Spit, was going to have to spit. Get a haircut. Spit, 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 spit. But he didn't have to like it. He gave his daddy the silent treatment and the wrinkle face all the way driving to the barber shop. They walked into the shop. There were a few men in chairs getting fades and beard trims. The place was full of warm people and musky hair smells. Sammy, the barber, grinned from ear to ear. "Leroy," he said with gladness, like usual. He chewed his toothpick and motioned for Leroy to jump into the chair. Then he swooshed the red apron around Leroy, sending cool ripples up his neck. Leroy only half smiled. He liked Sammy. He really did. But he hated hair murder.
He really did.
He was mad today. Daddy walked next door to grab a coffee, like usual. "Been a while," said Sammy, making conversation. Maybe
my hair is scissor-proof by now,"
mumbled Leroy. "Problem is," said Sammy, "my scissors are magical." He brandished his scissors in front of Leroy's face. They were glittering silver with strange gold patterns on them. They looked very old and quite magical indeed. "Your hair is strong, Leroy," said Sammy. "To be honest, there are probably only 3 or 4 barbers in the world that could handle you. But make no mistake, I am one of them. Never met hair I couldn't cut. Believe that." "Challenge accepted," said Leroy. Leroy was a strong little boy. He gritted his teeth and pushed all that power up into his hair. Sammy raised his scissors in the air. It was time for the duel to begin. Sammy pulled a huge lock of hair from Leroy's head and placed the thick lock between the scissors. Leroy closed his eyes to focus. He willed his hair to be strong. Sammy squeezed the scissors. Nothing happened. Sammy squeezed harder. Nothing still happened. Sammy squeezed with both hands. Nothing still happened. Sammy squeezed with both hands and one foot, but he couldn't cut through. Leroy's jaw was clenched and veins popped out of his neck. Sammy leaned down and whispered,
"Leroy, are you flexing your hair?"
He sounded flabbergasted. Leroy nodded and kept gritting his teeth and flexing. "Are you kidding me right now?" asked Sammy. "I'm impressed, Leroy." But Sammy was smiling. Why was Sammy smiling? "Oh, these aren't really my magical scissors," Sammy said, throwing them in the sink with a clank and a wink. "These are." He flicked his fingers like a magician, and a larger pair of scissors, black as midnight, shot out of his sleeve and into his hand. "I call these ones Black Diamond," laughed Sammy. Leroy's eyes grew wide. Suddenly there was a loud snip, and a huge lock of Leroy's hair fell to the floor. "Never met hair I couldn't cut," said Sammy with a chuckle. Leroy saw his fat lock of hair on the floor. It kind of wriggled and twitched a little bit. Then it was still. Hair murder!
No, I say that. Hair murder.
Leroy squeezed his fists. He gritted his teeth. He gave Sammy the wrinkle face times 10. He grunted and strained. And then something very strange happened. Suddenly, Leroy's hair grew back. It made kind of a shblook sound and shot up like a snake out of a hole. Sammy jumped back. That had never happened before. "Whoa, Leroy," said Sammy. "Did y'all see that?" he asked the other barbers. "Homie grew his hair back right in front of my face." Sammy just shook his head, smiling with wonder. Then he got serious. "Look, Leroy," he said, "let's be reasonable. Your dad brought you in here for a haircut, and that's exactly what I intend to give you." Leroy shook his head, squinting his eyes. Suddenly, all 4 of the other barbers were standing around Leroy with Sammy. Each had his biggest pair of scissors in his hands. "Leroy, we can do this the easy way or the hard way," said Sammy. "Challenge accepted!" Leroy screamed, gritting his teeth and clenching his neck. They all rushed him, scissors flashing. They each chopped huge chunks of his hair. Soon the floor was black with fallen locks, and Leroy was nearly bald with patches here and there. The barbers stepped back and just stood there, breathing hard and nodding to each other in victory. "Don't worry, Leroy. I'll clean up and make it look nice," said Sammy. "Let's stop this madness and get this done, okay?" But Leroy wasn't listening. His eyes were closed and he was concentrating. His head began to rumble. The barbers looked at each other. Suddenly, hair erupted from Leroy's head like a volcano. It came out so fast and furious, the barbers had no time to react. They all fell back as Leroy filled the entire barbershop with his twisting black locks. A window cracked. No one could move. They were all squished against walls and floors and the ceiling with thousands of pounds of hair. The barbers groaned. The customers moaned. Leroy smiled.
"It's all fun and games until someone breaks a window,"
said one of the barbers in a muffled voice, like his mouth was smushed against the wall. "You win, Leroy," whimpered Sammy. "What did you do to my shop? Why'd you bust up my shop?" he asked. Sammy sounded sad. Those words snuck down into Leroy's tender heart. Leroy remembered himself. He remembered that he had forgotten himself somewhere in all the anger and wanting his own way. Leroy felt bad for breaking the barbershop. He also felt bad for disobeying his daddy's wishes. He realized that he had basically thrown a hair tantrum. He felt embarrassed and ashamed of the damage he had done. Leroy's heartbeat started to slow down, and his hair kind of sucked back into his head slowly with a rustling, slurping sound. Everybody helped clean up, and soon everything was back to normal except the cracked window. "I'm sorry, Sammy. I didn't mean to bust up your shop," said Leroy. Sammy half grinned. "I can't believe you can shoot your hair out of your head like a volcano." "You going to let me finish your haircut?" he asked. Leroy furrowed his brow for a moment, resisting the urge to spit. Then he nodded and got back into the chair. Sammy swooshed the red apron around Leroy, sending cool ripples up his neck again.
Again.
In the end, he let Sammy give him the haircut. And it was a good haircut, like always. And Leroy even had a good attitude about it, mostly. He had to sweep hair on Saturdays for several weeks to pay for the broken window. Not awesome, but more than fair. Hair tantrums can be very expensive.
Really expensive.
The end. All right, guys.